I'm Jim Brewer, and I'm the Director of Training for the Surefire Training Academy. I've been a certified chimney sweep for pushing 40 years now. I've been in the industry for a long time. I own a chimney company in Virginia, and I do a lot of code work for the National Chimney Sweep Guild. I've been their representative to NFPA and also for a while to the IRC. So I'm looking forward to bringing this presentation to you, and the topic of this presentation is using the International Residential Code. So we're going to talk about how to use the book, the layout of the book, and basically prepare you for your Chimney Safety Institute of America, CSIA certification exam. So in part one is going to be an introduction to the International Residential Code. And then in part two, we will talk about the layout of the code. And then in part three of this seminar, we will get into some sample questions that will help you when you take your actual exam. Okay, so the Chimney Safety Institute of America, CSIA, tests currently from the 2015 edition of the International Residential Code. And this is a great big book, as you can see. It's a thick book. I think it's about 900 pages. And it's got a lot of information in it for constructing residential homes. Okay, this doesn't tell you how to build skyscrapers or anything like that. It talks about residential homes. When you take your exam, you can actually take your exam from a printed copy of the book, or you can also use an electronic copy, which is kind of nice because you can use the search feature. Let's say I want to find out something about a chimney cricket. I just type in cricket, click next, and there you go. It takes you right to the information about cricket. So this is a great way to take your exam, and we will show you how all of that works. Okay. When you take the certification exam, for the code part, the IRC part, it's a 30-question open book exam. You can use either the paper copy or you can use the digital copy, but it's open book. Okay, so you just basically, you need to know how to work your way through the code. Okay. So that's what we're going to do in this presentation. We're going to teach you how to navigate through the IRC. Okay. It's important, though, for you as a chimney service technician to be familiar with what's in effect in your service area at home where you work. That may not be NFPA 211. That may not be the International Residential Code. Nonetheless, technicians should be familiar with both of those documents, and particularly with NFPA 211, even if it's not in effect where you work. Our industry has adopted portions of NFPA, particularly the chimney inspection section, as kind of our standard. All right. But again, you need to determine what's in effect in the areas that you work in, obtain a copy of that code, and be familiar with that code. Okay. So my challenge to you, if you don't know, as you're sitting here watching this seminar If you don't know exactly what code is in effect where you work and what year in addition, because most codes are updated every 3 years, make sure you have that information, make sure you have a copy of the code, and then review it and be reasonably familiar with that. That's very important, particularly if you're doing any type of installation work. Your installations need to follow the current codes in the area where you work. Okay, so just because somebody publishes a book, for example, the International Residential Code, and it's available for sale, that doesn't mean that that code is in force all over the world as international would apply. Codes must be adopted by some legislative body before they carry the force of law. And that might be your state government, it might be done at the city or county level, even the township level. I work in Virginia, and in Virginia we have a statewide uniform building code. Only our state legislator can determine what the code will be, and then the local jurisdictions, each city and town, enforces that code, but they can't change the code. And that's kind of the trend I see across the country now, but there are still areas where code adoption is left up to the local jurisdictions. And then, of course, there's even some areas where there is no adopted code. In that case, you should, for your company, pick one to use as a standard. And I would encourage you to either use NFPA 211 or the International Residential Code. Those are the two most widely recognized. But again, find out what's available where you work, what's in force where you work. Okay. So we've talked about codes. We need to touch on standards a little bit too. People hear that phrase, codes and standards, batted around. What does it really mean? There's lots of standards that are available, and most of those are product-specific standards. For example, UL 127 is the standard for factory-built fireplaces. It's approximately a 140-page book that tells how factory-built fireplaces are to be built. It talks about safety testing of the factory-built fireplace. It talks about the durability and performance of the factory-built fireplace. And so it provides a standardized testing method so that if a fireplace is approved and listed to UL 127, anybody seeing that mark has a degree of comfort or a degree of certainty that that's a safe product to use. The other thing about it is in lots of codes, the International Residential Code, NFPA 211, they make reference to those standards. For example, the section on factory-built fireplaces in the code can be fairly short. It'll say something to the effect of factory-built fireplaces should be tested and listed to UL 127 and installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. By making that one reference in the code, they are able to bring in essentially all of the requirements from that standard, that UL 127 standard. Okay, let's look at what some of the other standards are that are available. UL 103 is the standard for factory-built chimneys. As we've already mentioned, UL 127 is the standard for factory-built fireplaces. UL 441 is the standard for gas vents. UL 641 is the standard for Type L low-temperature venting systems. These are used primarily on some oil-fired appliances. UL 1482 is the standard for solid fuel type room heaters, i.e. wood stoves. UL 1618 is the standard for wall protection and floor protection systems. And then UL 1777 is the standard for chimney liners. Okay, so those are some of the common UL standards in the hearth industry. You will also hear about ANSI standards, okay? And these primarily affect gas-fired equipment. ANSI Z2111.2 is the standard for unvented room heaters. ANSI Z2150 is the standard for vented gas fireplaces. Z2160 is the standard for basically gas logs, vented gas logs for installation in decorative fireplaces. And then ANSI Z2188 is the standard for gas fireplace heaters. These are heater-rated gas fireplaces. Very similar in appearance to the Z2150 fireplaces, but they've got some additional testing in terms of efficiency and heat output. Okay. NFPA publishes a number of standards that you should be familiar with. NFPA 31 is the standard for oil burning equipment. NFPA 54 is also known as the National Fuel Gas Code, and it's all about the installation and venting of gas-fired equipment, including gas piping systems. And then NFPA 211 is the standard for chimneys, fireplaces, vents, and solid fuel burning appliances. And probably most important to our industry, to chimney service technicians, is NFPA 211 includes the chimney inspection requirements, the level 1, 2, and 3 requirements for chimney inspection. And finally, there's some ASTM standards. A few that are of application to our industry are ASTM C315, which is the specification for clay flue liners and chimney pots. And then ASTM C1283 is the standard for installation of clay flue lining. Okay. And these will be referenced in Chapter 10 of the IRC. Chapter 10 of the IRC includes the requirements for masonry chimneys, which we will talk more about later on. And we should touch on industry standards. As I've already mentioned, NFPA 211 and the chimney inspection requirements have become an industry standard for the chimney service industry. Another document that has become industry standard is NFPA 921, is an industry standard for fire investigators. All fire investigators follow this in terms of, scene assessment, evidence preservation, chain of custody, and things like that. But if you're doing chimney inspections, you should be following NFPA 211 with reference to chimney inspections. Okay. So, when you do chimney inspections, what do you base the inspection on? What's your baseline for the inspection? And I would suggest that you use current building code requirements for your area to create the baseline. The baseline is kind of the ideal subject. It's what you should be seeing in the field, okay? This is kind of the ideal chimney, if you will. So when you do your inspection, you want to compare what you actually see to the baseline, okay? In order to know or recognize that something's wrong, you need to understand what it should look like. So that's your baseline. And then make your recommendations in your inspection based on deviation from the baseline. Okay. And also remember that codes provide a minimum requirement. They are the bare minimum that the code world, the industry has determined. This is, one way of saying it, the least acceptable requirements. You can certainly exceed those requirements. For example, the code says a chimney needs to be 3 feet tall. You can make it taller. You can make it 5 feet or 10 feet taller if you choose, and there might be reasons you need to do that. But as a bare minimum, the code says the chimney has to be 3 feet tall. Okay. Another concept we need to talk about is that of grandfathering, or more accurately, retroactivity. Most building codes have a section called retroactivity, or possibly labeled existing structures, within, the first couple of pages of the code. And essentially what it will say is that the code does not apply to existing installations, or in other words, don't apply a 2015 or a 2018 code to a 50-year-old installation. If that installation was proper 50 years ago, it can continue to be used in most cases. There are some examples that supersede grandfathering or retroactivity, but in general, it wouldn't be practical to go back and make corrections and start rebuilding parts of homes every time the code changes. That just wouldn't be practical. So that's what grandfathering or retroactivity is all about. The IRC in section 102.7, existing structures, says the legal occupancy of any structure existing on the date of adoption of this code shall be permitted to continue without change, except as is specifically covered in the code, the International Property Maintenance Code, or the International Fire Code, or as is deemed necessary by the building official for the general safety and welfare of the occupants and the public. Okay, couple examples. Fire sprinkler systems is one example. There were lots of buildings built before fire sprinkler systems were required. But by and large now, most areas of the country have said that public buildings, and certainly dormitories, colleges, that type of thing, hotels, motels, have to be retrofitted with sprinkler systems. This is an example of where the industry as a whole thinks that's necessary, and that the expense of retrofitting these existing installations is a beneficial expense in terms of life safety. Okay. I also, closer to home and closely related to our industry, I want to talk about chimney shrouds just a little bit. These pictures illustrate some common chimney shrouds, which is basically a decorative housing around the top of a chimney. And what all of the current codes say is that decorative shrouds shall not be installed unless they're listed for the fireplace or chimney system they're being used with. But keep in mind, most of these codes, the IRC, NFPA, for the most part, those are installation codes, and their requirements apply to new installation. An interesting requirement, though, found in the International Fire Code says that decorative shrouds installed at the termination of factory-built chimneys shall be removed except where such shrouds are listed and labeled for use with the specific factory-built chimney system. Okay, so that is clearly superseding retroactivity. The fire chiefs of the nation have determined that these shrouds pose a significant risk and that they should be removed unless they're listed for that system. Okay. But another topic that we need to talk about, because it's fine to say something is grandfathered or the code doesn't apply to it, but we also have to use good common sense and recognize that codes have changed primarily based on fire loss experience. If a number of fires occur because of a particular thing that's happening, pretty soon the building codes are going to be changed to prevent that from happening. So we know that building codes evolve based on a fire loss experience and that they're typically changed for a reason. Okay. So if you're working in a 100-year-old home that doesn't have a chimney liner in it, it's not proper to say that the building code requires you to install a chimney liner, because again, that's not quite true. Retroactivity would allow that to continue to be used. But what you can say, and what you probably should say, is that current industry wisdom is that unlined chimneys simply pose too great a risk. The common wisdom, the common understanding is that unlined chimneys just aren't safe and something better exists, i.e. a chimney liner. So you can tell them that you highly recommend the installation of a chimney liner. Chimney liners are proven to make chimneys safer, and you think it's a great idea and you would recommend that they do this. Just don't say they're legally required to do it because the code says so. If it was legal when it was built, in most cases it can continue to be used. Okay. So we've talked about an introduction to the IRC and a little bit about codes and standards in general. In the next section, we will talk about the layout of the International Residential Code. So let's go ahead and conclude there, wrap it up, and we'll be back for part 2. Thank you for watching.